Episode 2 of Persia invading Greece, right?
We've never done that before. That sounded really formal.
I know, but yeah, I don't know. What do you do? So for the third chair, we did an episode previously. What number is that? I'm supposed to know that. Is it 15? Oh, I'm supposed to know this.
157.
Yeah. So basically, I listened to Persian Fire by Tom Holland, and Matt's been researching Persia, and we had a surprise conversation. And I don't know a lot about this subject, and you're letting me pretend like I do. Kind of.
You did really well, man. No joke. You did really well. You retained a ton for one reading of something you've never been over before. Yeah, it was fun. And it was cool to see the parts that stood out to you. That was enjoyable for me as well.
It's an interesting topic. And so where we left off, can I just bring us back up to speed as if I know what I'm talking about?
I would love that. Please.
And I still have the ability to just say whatever, and you can just correct me when I go out of bounds. It's kind of like, this is kind of how I view this. You know how when you go bowling, and then they got the bumpers they pull out?
Oh, yeah.
I feel like you're the bumpers for me, and you're just letting me just go down the lane like a drunk history guy. And then you're just like, hey, no, that's wrong. Let's correct that. That's kind of what it feels like. And it's kind of fun, to be honest with you.
Before we're done with this conversation, though, I want to talk more about, quote, wrong.
Okay.
And how we know that and whether we know that. And Persia is a great topic for two reasons. One, it's this fantastic story that is set with one foot in the old mythic world of magic and wizards and demigods and all of that kind of stuff. And then the other foot set in history from the classical world as we know it. And so it's this very dynamic, very interesting time when the earth was younger. The other reason that it's interesting, though, is because it is that far back, and there's enough sources, or I should say few enough sources, that you can develop somewhat of a mastery of all of them rather quickly. Because of that, it's a great topic to talk about history in general and how we know anything at all about things that happened before now. And I want to get into that before we're done.
Oh my goodness, dude. Okay. Yeah, that's a whole thing. The scientific method versus the historical method. Very interesting topic. Bringing me back up to speed. So we've got Persia, Persia in the east. We've got Greece in the west. And Persia invaded Greece. So let's go over the rulers of Persia. We had Cyrus the Great, who had
very good
Cambyses and Bardia. And
very good.
And Cambyses was killed when he got on a horse and was stabbed or cut by his lance, and it became gangrenous, and he died.
Yeah.
His lance bearer, Darius, rode across the whole empire or whatever to go find Bardia, and knocked on the door and was like, "What's up?" and then killed Bardia.
Yeah.
And then we had
that's a quick version.
And then we had the infamous stink hand incident that created Darius as the king. And by the way,
about as reliable as most methods throughout history of picking rulers. Let's go with it.
Yep. And so then Darius was king, and then the son of Darius was Xerxes, and that's where we're at. And we're not going to get to Artaxerxes, but we're at Xerxes is where we're at. We had the Battle of Marathon, and the Greeks won. And so the Persians came over. Who was the leader at the Battle of Marathon? Was that Darius?
Dadas and Artaphernes, operating on behalf of Darius, who I imagine he just didn't think his presence would be necessary to deal with these people.
Okay. So they whipped him at Marathon, and then they turned tail and they ran back to Persia, which was a whole thing. And then Xerxes, this is how many years later? About a decade, a little less than a decade, right?
Yeah, about that. 490-ish to 480-ish.
So Xerxes is coming back, and he gets to the Hellespont, which is that little area there opposite the Bosphorus in Turkey, and modern-day Turkey. And they whip the Hellespont, and they make this big pontoon bridge, and they go across. And we're getting right to the point where Xerxes is coming across with his army, and it's everybody, as you said. It's like the whole world versus Greece. The Greeks don't like each other, but they've decided to work together because they know this big army's coming, and they've got to figure out how to win. Up there in in Athens, you got Themistocles that had previously it basically persuaded everyone to build the navy, and the Greeks don't know anything, about the navy. They have these triremes that they're building, and they're still in the embryonic stages of a naval power. And you're about to take us to Thermopylae, right? What's about to happen?
All right. You only got so much time every year to campaign, right? It's like planting season. I know it's longer in Alabama than it is in South Dakota, but there's only so long that the weather is fit for doing certain activities every year. And the same thing was true of making war. You can't just go on campaign all year long because you got crops and supplies and things that you got to have in place to feed, if some of the ancient historians are to be believed, millions of people who are on this gigantic campaign of revenge to go and punish the Athenians and the Greeks. So the Greeks have Xerxes at their doorstep quicker than expected, but they also know that if they can get the situation into September, Xerxes is going to be out of time and he's going to have to go home. So
he's going to run out of food.
It's not just a matter that the Greeks need to win. The Greeks need to win slowly. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Because he can run out of food. That makes a lot of sense to me. That makes a lot of sense. The winter will come in. Xerxes isn't going to want to do a winter over in Greece. He's not going to want to do that. So yeah, totally get it.
And let's take it a step further. I mean, you read the book. What is it that Xerxes really wants to do here? In the same way that Babylon was the crown jewel for Cyrus's conquest of the ancient world, what is the crown jewel of the Greek conquest in the mind of Xerxes?
Athens. So Athens is
that is
right up north, and he just wants to burn Athens. My understanding is, as this was going down, they consulted with the oracle at Delphi. Is that how you say it? Delphi?
Delphi, yeah.
Delphi. My parents used to work for a company called Delphi. That's interesting. And so anyway, they consulted with the oracle, and the oracle says, hey, this is what's going to go down. So you're going to mourn the loss of a king? Like, what did they say? What did the oracle say exactly? Something like Athens is going to burn, and before the end of it, you're going to mourn the loss of a king, or something like that. What did she say?
Man, I might be able to find it in Herodotus. I still have that book sitting out, but you and I made a handshake agreement not to Google things, so I don't remember exactly what the oracle said, but it involved something was going to have to burn and the loss of a king, and it gave the Spartans some pretty serious pause, but it also gave the Athenians some pause. Like, wait, there's a ton of different ways to interpret that oracle. In the end, both parties figured out a way to interpret this vague oracle that caused them to believe that they would win, and so they committed themselves to battle. So Themistocles, the warrior and the politician, he threw all of his clout, all of his reputation behind the idea of emphasizing one aspect of their military, one aspect of their defenses. He thought if they got strong in this area, they could hold off a Persian invasion. What was that thing he wanted them to invest in?
The Navy. He wanted them to build trireme ships, and which means they had to build them, which takes a long time to build. I actually looked up while I was reading the book. I haven't done it since our blood oath covenant to not look up more stuff. I looked up how they built triremes, and they were really interesting. Do you know like tongue and groove wood? Like you know,
sure.
Yeah. So imagine a tongue and groove joint, but you drill a hole and you bang a peg in there, locking them together. That's kind of how they were constructed, almost like a lamination. It's very interesting.
Huh.
And so I thought about making a video about just triremes and how they work, because I thought it was fantastic.
I would adore that. Do they cover them in pitch? How do they make the seams watertight?
They'd have to. I didn't get that far in my research, but they would absolutely have to. Pitch or something. That's what Themistocles wanted. He's like, hey, we need a navy. Now, what I didn't have is a picture in my mind of where the naval battles would happen. Now, I know ultimately the Greeks said there's going to be a two-prong approach. So we're going to have this land battle, and then we're going to have this naval battle. And somehow the Spartans, who were really, really good at land warfare with their shields and their spears and also their short swords.
And their discipline. Oh,
yeah. What was so interesting in the book is they talk about if you're a Spartan and there's 10 of us and we're lined up, it's much bigger than that. but my shield would protect you, and the guy to my right, his shield would protect me if you're on my left. And then, we would kind of push the enemy as one with our shields, and then we would open up, and then we would stab, and then we would close our shields back up. So it's super, super important that everything works in the timing. The timing is just critical. And so that was fantastic to learn about that. But what it also meant is that if the guy to your right gets scared and runs, suddenly your flank is exposed and you're going to die. So it was super incredibly important that everybody had nerves of steel.
How do you get people to be like that?
Well, I've had conversations with Marines, and they undergo training. Now, from what it sounds like, the training of the Spartans was so much more difficult than the training of modern soldiers. But they'll do things in training for the Marines where they'll just be on a run, and they'll throw a pine cone and say, "Grenade!" One guy, we call him Gunny. Gunny said, "Oh yeah, we used to get ticked off when somebody would throw a, quote, grenade at us, and we weren't the first to jump on it." And he goes, "Man, you took my CMH, my Congressional Medal of Honor." So he said, to some degree, they almost brainwash us to quickly do the right thing in battle. I don't want to say brainwashing, but there's military training is extremely aggressive. And the more elite the fighting unit, the more incredibly taxing the training is. And it gets to the point where you want to make sure that this is brainstem level stuff. I am not speaking from a position of authority. We should have Lee on here. But this is my understanding of how it worked. And so I can only imagine that the Spartans, one of the most elite fighting units in the world. In fact, Demaratus, the guy who was advising Xerxes, he was a Greek.
Yeah. He
was advising Xerxes. He said, "Look, when it comes to the fighting force, the Spartans, they are the best in the world."
Yes.
Like, they are incredible. And so he's advising Xerxes, and he's saying things like, "Look, you've asked me the question, I will give you the answer. They are some of the best in the world." I think that's interesting.
I don't think he was even saying some. If I recall those exchanges correctly, as they're relayed from the distant past, the Greek advisors in general felt Xerxes was being way too flippant about the Spartans. And they were like, "You just don't get it, man. Oh, I have immortals. Yeah, but you just don't get it, man. Your dad might get it. Datis or Artaphernes, they would get it, but you just don't get it." I think the difference between the way you train a soldier now and the way the Spartans did it is that now you get a soldier when they're 18 or 20 or whatever. Back then, it was from zero. From age 0, you were taught to reject comfort and to accept your place in this warrior cult. And so that shield line, it wasn't just a result of training, it was a result of culture for the shield line to work the way it did. Because you got to understand, I mean, Thebes and Argos and Athens, everybody had hoplites. Everybody had these heavily armored, round shield bearing and spear wielding troops who overlapped shields and worked together. And they were all very good at it. Sparta was regarded as being exceptional at it. But the other thing about it is that it's really a conflict. I think this is what captures the imagination of so many people when they look back on this fight. It's really a conflict of two ideologies. The Persians, especially by the time you get to Xerxes, are central planners. The king decides all the things. Whereas the Greeks they're kind of like us, that individualistic West thing. And so the idea is, well, what happens if you take people who are compelled to go and fight for a king they've never met in a gigantic global empire? What happens when you pit them against these individual little city-states who feel individual city pride and who are voluntarily protecting their neighbor in this way? I think that's kind of the way the narrative has been spun up. It's not just a battle of two types of weapons. It's a battle of two types of mentalities, two types of approaches. And this isn't the only time in history we see this. I mean, we see this in the way World War II is characterized and the way the Cold War is characterized. Heck, we see this in the way that Survivor song from Rocky IV, where Sylvester Stallone fights Dolph Lundgren. I mean, there's a line in that song, Burning Hearts, I think it's called, where it's like, is it East versus West? Is it man versus man or East versus West? Like the way they even punch each other in that movie, it's a referendum on whose approach to life and society is better. And I think that adds a really fun wrinkle to all of this. What would you expect, if that's true, what would you expect the fighting style of the Persians to be if their fighting style is a reflection of their societal values?
Well, I think what was so interesting about the Persians is they were not a homogenous culture. As I understand it, this is me speaking outside my expertise, but they were conquered peoples, and they would get the best soldiers from each of these people groups, and they would bring them as they were. So I would expect the people that were really good with equitation and archery would ride around on the battlefield shooting arrows from their horses, and I would expect people who did different things to do the thing that they did best, kind of like in Lord of the Rings, where they all bring their and my axe, those sorts of things.
Yes,
and so I don't think they would have been as disciplined strategically. I mean, I guess at this point we're talking about the tactical level. But it doesn't seem like they would be as disciplined. Their strategy was, let's just overwhelm them with numbers. In fact, that's part of the thing that happened. They had a group. My understanding. Well, let's set up Thermopylae, however you say it. So
yeah, I think we're there now. Yeah,
there's two things going on. So Themistocles is like, okay, there's going to be a naval battle up here, and so up near Athens, up to the north, but for some reason,
well, Athens is way south. Let me catch that, because that'll make the map confusing. So the Battle of Thermopylae is on the Greek mainland, heading up toward Macedonia and Thrace. It's on the Aegean Sea. That battle happened right on the coast, right up against the coast of the Aegean Sea, a rocky, precipitous, cliffy area. Then as you go south down the coast of Greece, you get to the two main peninsulas that make up southern classical Greece. That's the Attican Peninsula, which is the little one. That's where Athens is. And the Peloponnesian Peninsula, which is the bigger one. That's where Sparta is. So Athens kind of sits around the bend and to the south of the direction from which Xerxes and his entourage is approaching. So Thermopylae is north of Athens.
Okay. Didn't know that. Thermopylae is north of Athens. Okay, so it's on the path. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So there's this place called the Hot Gates. There's these two sheer cliff faces that come right next to each other, like a cart with an ox can walk through it. It's very, very narrow. And they send these Spartans down there, and they're led by a king. They're two Spartan kings at all times. The Spartans have two kings. And one of the kings, Leonidas, or Leonidas, however you want to pronounce it. That's the way they pronounce it.
Leonidas. I like the way it sounds.
It sounds cooler. Let's just be real. It sounds cooler. But in the book, he said Leonidas, and I was like, man, it just sounds so much cooler the other way, like they did it in the movie 300. So he's leading these
not
Spartans down there, and they have a lot of people with them. I thought it was just 300 Spartans, but they had these other people that were it starts with an H. They were helping. What were their names?
Yes, helping does start with an H.
Shut up. These people, they had, I forget the name. Basically, they had these people that would help them with their armor and help them logistically and all this. I forget what their names were.
But the point is there were other people present.
Yes.
It wasn't just Sparta. I mean, the legend that it's 300 individual Spartans and that was it makes it sound way cooler. But yeah, there was probably about 7,000 Greeks there when things got started.
Right. And so they set up shop right there in the middle of the Hot Gates. And there's some kind of geothermal activity or there, whatever. And so the Persians roll up and they're like, all right, here we go. We're going to ask you to move aside, please. We need to go through the Hot Gates. Can we please go through there? And they're like, oh, heck no. Is this where the Persian army said, the king requests that you drop your weapons, and they said, "Come and take them." Is this where that was said?
I think it's got to be here, right?
Yeah, this is where
Yeah, I think it's got to be here because they traded with each other. Yeah.
Molon Labe basically come take them.
No, it has to be there. It has to be there because I've been to the battlefield and it's not well marked. It's just like a rest stop on the equivalent of the Greek interstate. And it doesn't look at all like the landscape looked back then. The sea coastline has moved and everything. But there's a sculpture of Leonidas and it says Molon Labe. So I think this has to be where he said it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, kind of.
My favorite moment about this is they see all the Persians coming and they get ready. They start getting on their hoplite armor and stuff like that. And the Persians had wicker shields. Some of the first Persians that hit them had wicker shields. And they had all their bronze stuff, right? And so the moment of first contact, literally contact, shield to shield, when they hit, at that moment, that is when every Spartan in that line would have known, oh, we're about to destroy them. Like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I mean, they showed up with stuff that's the equivalent of how you build a papasan for Pier 1 imports
what's a papasan?
To try to shut down the best fighting. Remember like those big bowl chairs that were popular in the 80s?
Oh, yeah.
And they're all like bamboo and wicker and woven together and stuff. I don't think that's going to handle a Spartan spear.
Yeah, so they just start carving them up, man. Just start going at it and destroying them. And what that must have sounded like, that moment, you're in between these two sheer cliff walls, just going ballistic right next to your buddy Barnacles, and you're just going at it. I don't have a tape about this. I'm sorry.
That's such a pity. Herodotus will have to be the tape this time around.
Yeah, exactly. They just started going crazy. I mean, do you think they were scared? They had to have been scared.
I would think so. I would think the Persians would be more scared. The Spartans are better outfitted. The Greeks in general, they won at the Battle of Marathon. And it's like watching a rangy fighter. Like if you're playing Street Fighter 2 and you're using Ken and somebody else is using Dalsim, Dalsim really wants to keep you away. He's that big, long, leggy guy who can kick like halfway across the screen. Ken wants to get in tight and really mix it up. Well, at Marathon, we saw that the Persians do not want those Greek hoplites to close that distance. The Persians want to break their will and soften them up with arrows from a distance, but those Greeks could just absorb volleys if they were disciplined with their shields. And once they close the distance, well, every bit closer you get to those groups of archers, it takes out a certain percentage of the archers who can find an attack angle where they can put fire on you, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then once you get to within 30, 40, 50 feet, only the front couple of rows can put fire on you. And it's not enough intensity. It's not enough pressure to do anything. And you're dead. They're going to get slaughtered by spear and sword. They're going to go into retreat. And this is where the rout is on. And then the Greeks would chase them down and slaughter them in the mud as they tried to get back to their boats at Marathon. So all these Persian soldiers know the exact formula, the very unique circumstances required to beat these hoplites. It would require a ton of effective fire and not getting close to them. Well, now they're all being funneled down. And so the advantage of their numbers is being drastically reduced, and they can't put any kind of effective fire on these Spartans. It's not doing anything. It's not dislodging them at all.
Yeah, there was the one comment when they said, there's going to be enough arrows to blot out the sun. One of the soldiers said, then we'll fight in the shade, which is kind of a baller quote. Yeah. Which
laconic wit. There it is.
Yeah. I mean, that's like, hey, we're probably about to die. We might as well have a laugh. So
yeah, according to Herodotus' account, which is only a couple of pages long, for all of this legend, it's only a couple pages. What we get is a Xerxes who makes one final plea. He's like, just give me the gift of earth and water, and you'll be taken care of. All I want is Athens. That's the deal that's offered. But King Leonidas, of course, bravely refuses. They bounce back and forth with some clever threats or, again, laconic wittiisms. And Xerxes starts throwing troops at him for a period of a few days. And the Spartans do not budge. Now, for some reason that escapes me, I assume that it was to reinforce the Athenians, knowing that this wasn't going to work out. They wouldn't be able to hold the pass indefinitely. The idea being that if these extra troops here are sent back, they could help Themistocles at the big defense of Athens, because Leonidas knows the Spartans are not going to be able to hold the pass at the hot gates much longer. And especially that becomes apparent when a traitor reveals a goat path by which the Persians could encircle the Spartans and bypass their position. There, do you remember this from the Tom Holland book?
Yeah. I mean, like in the movie 300, they really play up this character and make this character, I don't know, it's almost like a Quasimodo kind of character. But in the book, it's just a person that basically sells them out. It's a local that's like, hey, here's a path here. Because if you're Xerxes, you're like, okay, cool, there's a pass. I have a huge army. Surely there's some other way to get there. And so just start climbing rocks, guys. see what we can do. Find a place where you can climb. Get around them, flank them, and then just shoot them in the back with arrows. Make it hard. And a few days in, they figure it out, right?
Who's the most famous traitor in all of history?
It depends on where you're from. In the U.S., it's Benedict Arnold. And if the shot that went into his leg would have killed him, he wouldn't have been a traitor at all. He would have been a hero. But he lived long enough to become the enemy. What was the name of this person that told the Persians how to get around?
Ephialtes, or Ephialtes. And up until Benedict Arnold lifted that title off of him, he was widely regarded to be the biggest rat in all of history. He sold out the Spartans, and you could never defeat the Spartans head on. They would have held that territory forever, all the way until fall. Or so the thinking goes. And Xerxes would have had to go home if it weren't for this guy. Maybe that's the case. Probably that's not the case. You can't have your hero just losing pound for pound. But I mean, really, Thermopylae it's a defeat, because Persian troops do follow Ephialtes through the goat paths of the mountains. They do come in behind. The Spartans are encircled. They never say die. And only 2 troops, according to Herodotus, escape. And there lays brave Leonidas and the 300 Spartans who held the pass at Thermopylae. So on paper, the Battle of Thermopylae is a Persian victory. But have you heard the term Pyrrhic victory?
Say it again. Spell that.
The term Pyrrhic, Phyrrric, I think.
No.
I think I'm pronouncing it right.
No.
Pyrrhic.
No, what does that mean?
This is a victory where you technically win, but you gave up so much to win that it's not a win in the grand scheme of things. So it's like in Captain America Civil War, where Hawkeye, who never, ever, ever misses, is fighting against Iron Man. He shoots an arrow at Iron Man while he's floating around in front of like a parking garage or something. Iron Man's like, you missed. And Hawkeye's like, yeah, made you look, or whatever it was. And it was enough to get Tony Stark's eye off the ball so that then they could hit him with a bunch of other things. And so if the whole game was just, does Hawkeye hit every shot? Well, he technically lost there. And Tony and Iron Man technically won, but the way it played out, the net result was actually the other way around. And so here, the extra time that is bought proves to be the difference in what happens in the defense of Athens. But before we go to Athens, anything else about Thermopylae that stands out to you?
No, I mean, Leonidas died, and they cut him in half. And so they cut Leonidas, like they cut his body in half, and they put it on 2 poles on the other side of the hot gates, so that as the Persian army marched through the hot gates, they literally split the Spartan king in half, and they walked through it, which is symbolically awful. So that's pretty wild, man. That is quite the triumphal entry into your land campaign, right?
Interesting choice of words.
It's kind of really dark. And like, hey, all right, we just cut this guy in half. Now let's go burn this city. And that's the moment, if I'm a Persian, I look at somebody else, I'm like, are we the baddies? Are we the baddies?
Is it possible we're the baddies?
so it's like, what? I'll remind you at this point, you're Team Persia.
Well, I told you I got off the Persia train about the time that they invaded mainland Greece. During the invasion, I'm Team Greece.
Okay.
But In the early going, I mean, Athens was just being a butt. I mean, that's what provoked the whole thing. Athens was causing problems in territory that wasn't any of their business. And in the early going, Persia was pretty awesome. I still think Persia, I mean, by the standards of the ancient world, Persia is awesome. But very much what they did with Leonidas is reflective of their, I wouldn't even say foreign policy, their domestic policy for anybody who would resist them was, if you resist us, you will not believe our cruelty. It will exceed your wildest dreams how much we will punish you. But if you give us that gift of earth and water, it will exceed your wildest dreams how good that will be for you and your people. We will make it worth your while. You will like being under the very light burden of Persia. And that's not how Assyria was. That's not how Babylon was. Babylon and Assyria were, you will suffer or you will suffer. Which kind of suffering do you want? Persia, they really had a pretty good track record of making things better for the people who just happened to side with them. Still, the Greeks didn't want anything to do with it. They're like, just leave us alone. You be Persia over there. We're going to be Greek over here. And the Persians just couldn't throttle it back. They couldn't let it go. So no, I'm Team Greece as we're moving toward Athens here. What do you remember about the invasion of Athens?
They were trying to figure out what to do. They're like, okay, do we stand here and fight? So we've got the Persian hordes coming up to destroy us. Do we stay here and defend the city, or do we flee? And the argument was made, let's flee. You know, we're going to lose. So let's flee the city. Let's rally over there and let's figure out how to beat them. And so they did. And the Acropolis there in Athens, like the high place where the temple was, this was before the Parthenon was made. You know, all their high places of worship there, they just tore it down stone by stone. The Persians came in and just destroyed everything, which I think is stupid. Could they not have stayed there the winter if they wanted to? Like, we've got this city and these people's houses. We can stay here. No, let's just burn it all. That's crazy to me. So it wasn't about occupation.
Well, let me say this. They could have stayed there if they could control the seas. But the one reason they can't stay there is because though the Athenians gave up their city voluntarily, I mean, they just forfeited it. They completely pulled back. They still had their fleet. And as long as you have that fleet, Xerxes doesn't really own anything. He's standing in Athens for the moment, but he can't keep it. He can't hold it. He's going to have to leave. And if he tries to leave by boat, he's going to get lit up by that Athenian fleet. So as long as those boats are sitting there, this thing isn't a done deal. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and this makes Themistocles look like a mega genius. Like a mega genius. He was just right.
Yes.
He was so incredibly right. And so he had to argue people into the boats thing, and then they're fleeing to the boats and like, oh, good thing we have these boats. Sorry I argued against this. My bad. So
sorry I voted against you every single time. I sort of get it now, begrudgingly.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, apparently Themistocles was able to think ahead and understand Athens isn't that defensible. We don't really have any way to stop a Persian overland invasion. We can hassle their ships as they try to support that march toward Athens, and they did. And the Athenians ran into a little bit of trouble right about the time that the Battle of Thermopylae was occurring, as they got caught up in a storm. The Persians got caught up in a storm. The Athenians lost some ships. It was looking rough, but still the vast majority of the fleet was intact in this little area called the Straits of Salamis, just outside of Athens there around the Attican Peninsula. And yeah, it gave them somewhere to go. It gave them the option to say, bummer, our city's going to get burned, but let's do it. And so Xerxes is seated high atop things in Athens. He's sort of happy, I guess. He kind of got what he wanted. He wanted Athens to burn. That was his objective. And it's almost like he made a deal with the devil of war to get what he wanted. I want Athens to burn, but he asked for the wrong thing. He should have wanted the Athenians to be ultimately and finally defeated, and he didn't plan well enough for that. So what do you remember about how the decisive naval battle, the moment that would determine the fate of Greece and Persia and this whole campaign and everything. What do you remember about how that worked out?
Well, first of all, I have questions about naval battle during this time.
Okay.
So this is the new Greek Navy. They just got their boats. They're still shiny. They don't really know how to use them that well yet. So they're triremes. They have 3 rows of oars that go up. They have sails as well. How do they fight? They have rams, correct? The name of the game is I point my boat, the pointy part of my boat, I point it at the side of your boat, and I hit you. So it's not unlike in World War I when you had the circling war, where the name of the game is to get behind the airplane of your opponent and shoot them with a machine gun. So in this particular type of battle, the goal is to ram the side of the boat and sink it. Am I understanding that correctly?
Well, sink it if you can, or become locked up with it, engaged with it. Like when 2 American football players run into each other on a play and their face masks get locked. Have you ever seen that happen?
Yeah.
And they have to come in and sort it out, and it's all clumsy. Well, if those 2 guys were in a fight after that play, well, you can't leave. You are married to each other right now, so you're just going to have to fight it out, and whoever wins, wins. So one way to win a naval battle was to outmaneuver your opponent and broadside them with your trireme, and they would have rams on the front, sometimes literal carvings of rams.
Bronze,
and it would
right?
be tipped in there'd be metal. There'd be an overlay there. Sometimes it was just kind of like a fist or a ball on the front. Sometimes it was kind of a wedge that they would put on the front. And the idea is you just want to drill the broad, vulnerable side of your opponent's ship. And if it sinks, well, just keep going. Let those sailors drown, jab them with oars as you go by. Nothing more needs to be done here. You already won. They're disabled. But for the most part, the people who study this era of naval warfare refer to the people who are rowing and fighting on these ships. Well, the rowers, they call sailors, and the people who are rowing/fighting, they call Marines. So there would be soldiers on these ships who are ready, if you broadside another ship and it doesn't go down, they're ready to leap onto that ship and kill whoever they need to kill on board to take control of that disabled ship. Or maybe the ship isn't even that badly damaged, and you can just completely flip control of the ship, and now you've gained one that you've taken from the enemy.
I've got to believe they have archers and slingers as well. I have to believe that.
I think I've heard of slingers on these ships. I would guess there would be archers, but I don't recall that.
There have to be.
Off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Sure seems like it'd be advantageous.
Yeah, there'd have to be. Interesting. And so they had all kinds of different strategies that they would use, right? Like one description is the boats would kind of circle the wagons kind of thing, where you point all of your boats out like a porcupine.
Yes.
You get into a ring of other ships and you'd point your boats out, and then when they would come in on you, you would row and ram. That seems like an interesting strategy, but it's pretty archaic. You don't have cannons. You don't have ways to, it's just so interesting. Naval technology is an area of history that I think is wildly interesting.
Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's something that's had your attention for a long time on a lot of different levels.
It is, yeah. So my understanding is the Straits of Salamis are this small area that the Greeks somehow lured the Persians into. I don't know how. That part of the book was kind of fuzzy to me, but my understanding is the Persian fleet exists and the Greek fleet still exists.
Yes.
Somehow the Greeks lured the Persians into the Straits of Salamis and destroyed them. And it made it sound like an overwhelming victory, and I don't understand how or why they were so successful.
Yeah. Well, at this point, Xerxes had come down off of the Acropolis in Athens, and he had found a nice place to set up shop, and it was very comfortable, according to the ancient sources. And he was going to look at the Straits of Salamis that would get you in and out of the Bay of Eleusis, which is a pretty big bay. I've driven all around that and explored because I wanted to understand this battle for myself when I was in Greece. And what happens is you've got a whole bunch of intelligence and counterintelligence going on behind the scenes that actually made this battle winnable. Now, ultimately, it came down to the men in the boats and the women in the boats. There's a very prominent woman named Artemisia of Halicarnassus. She's from the same place as Herodotus, and she was one of the big commanders on the Persian side. But for the most part, the men in the boats were the ones who were going to decide how this was going to work out. But that opening position, where everybody is at on the game board when the opening gun fires, that is also going to determine a whole lot about how this works out. Or another question is just, is there going to be a battle at all? Because Xerxes could just leave behind a big enough element to hold Athens and gradually pick off any of the Athenians who are on the little islands in the middle of the bay. There were lots of ways that he could have resolved this with a little bit of patience. But there was this clever back and forth with a servant of Themistocles who he kept sending to Xerxes and his camp, making it sound like he was getting ready to desert Themistocles. The Greeks are in total disarray. This isn't going to work out. Now's your chance to strike. And Xerxes takes the bait. And who knows if he was a little bit suspicious or not, or maybe he just knew he needed to really wrap things up and be getting back to Persia. Our supply lines can't sustain this much longer. We've already been here a week and a half longer than we wanted to be because of that disaster at the Hot Gates and how long it took to get past those pesky Spartans. You know what? Let's just commit the fleet, wipe them out. We have superior numbers. They're in disarray. Now is the time to strike. And so Xerxes makes that commitment, but to his horror, as the Persian fleet makes their advance, they all discover at once that the Greeks are not in disarray. They form up quickly, they have a clear and obvious battle plan, and at a couple of key pinch points, they dominate the water and force the Persians into smaller numbers and chaos themselves on their side. And ultimately, they create such chaos that Artemisia, the main admiral of the Persian side in the whole fight, she ends up ramming some of her own Persian allies' ships to try to get out of the chaos and get out of the trap that has been set for her. So Herodotus kind of holds that out as the defining, what do you call it? That moment it epitomizes how much everything was flipped from the Greeks are in disarray to no, it is the Persians who are in disarray. And ultimately, this is a horrible, crushing defeat for Persia, and Herodotus seems to delight in the idea that Xerxes, with his silk slippers on his comfy portable throne, is sitting up watching the whole thing go down, probably just losing his mind.
That's wild. Do you think it came down to fighting on the decks? Do you think that's why it happened, or it was just clever positioning by each individual Greek commander? Because there were about double the boats, or even triple by some accounts, on the Persian side, right? That's a lot of boats.
Yeah, that's the rumor. I think both is my understanding. One of the really frustrating things about ancient warfare is we don't get much of a description of how these fights went down. Other than chaos, the ancient historians like to tell us when there was chaos or when somebody got tricked. They seem to really revel in that. But the ancient historians don't give us much about, well, the Athenian right with 1,200 men performed a wheel maneuver about half an hour into the battle and caught the Persian left making a folding maneuver, and that allowed pressure, the long spears, and they weren't able to get out of the range of the bowmen. We don't get anything like that. Anything you hear like that about this era of warfare is historians, military historians, going back to the place and being like, all right, let's work this through. We know what the weapons were like. Let's map this out. They were there, so they probably must have done this. The Greeks probably would have deployed in this manner. There's just a ton of speculation. Salamis stands out because we get a little bit more detail about the strategy and a little bit about what the combat actually looked like. But the horrors of the battlefield, this up-close, bone-crunching, bloody, put in your instrument of death and twist it and then try to get it back out of the guy you just killed fast enough to fend off the next guy, and the trauma and the ugliness and the smell and the bodies, None of that stuff comes down through history to us. So we really don't get a very human picture of what it was like to be on the field and what maneuvers and commands you're getting from the commanders on the ground. You get more of this poetic justice, reversal of fortune. You had the wrong attitude, and ironically, that wrong attitude came back to bite you in the butt kind of perspective that we get on all of this. So
I just looked up the Wikipedia page because I wanted to see the number of ships on each side, and it looks like the Phoenicians were fighting with the Achaemenid. How do you say it? The Persians. How do you say that again?
the Achaemenids.
Achaemenid.
Yeah, the Achaemenid dynasty.
So the Phoenicians were fighting, and they were like the bosses when it came to boats, right?
Yes.
And so
yes,
they had 300 ships in that battle, in the Battle of Salamis. And they were fighting on the side of the Persians. And the Greeks only had 370-something ships. And so just the Phoenicians alone, who were experts at naval battles, they had almost the same number of ships as the Greeks. And that's crazy. And then you had all these other people on top of that, the Egyptians, the Ionians. Wow. Okay, so they were overmatched. So they definitely had some good strategy. Interesting. Who was the commander on
it shouldn't have worked out.
Who was the commander on the Greek side?
It was the politician, Themistocles.
Really? So it was his, like his navy that he had commissioned. He was controlling him as well.
He got to command the navy he built. Yeah.
No way.
And it was his subtlety and deception that got Xerxes to commit at an ill-advised time that made the entire victory possible.
So you're telling me
Themistocles won this fight, and Leonidas laid down his life in support of a rival city's rival politician because apparently he believed in the vision, which is a very remarkable thing. It's not like these guys were close personal friends who hung around, well, we're all Greeks. For Leonidas to make the sacrifice he made to set up the Athenians for this victory that's pretty remarkable. But ultimately it was the vision of Themistocles and the battlefield decision-making of Themistocles that got it done.
So I'm just now coming to terms with how amazing Themistocles was, because I had never heard of his name before reading this book. But if I understand correctly, Themistocles was at the Battle of Marathon as a commander, as one of the strategoi, correct?
I believe so, yep.
And then moving forward, he became one of the first, what we think of as a politician in the modern sense. Like he lived down at the bad part of the town, and he campaigned, so to speak, to get his ideas. He used the art of rhetoric to persuade people to his way of thinking. And he was successful in that. And he ultimately defeated his political opponents. Starts with an A. Who's his major political opponent he defeated and he had to leave?
It's Just.
Aristides.
Aristides the Just.
So he beat Aristides in politics. And then he persuaded everybody to create a navy. And then he commanded that navy to win. So Themistocles is just amazing. I'm just now coming to terms with how impressive this individual was, and he's doing this over the course of 10 years. This is incredible. And it sounds like he was able to win people. He was able to move people emotionally from what you're saying about Leonidas. He was able to convince him to literally die for the cause. So what did he do after the Battle of Salamis? So they beat the Persians, right?
Yeah. They beat the Persians well enough that Persia has to leave. It's that time of year, and Xerxes leaves behind a remnant of forces. They still think they're going to win this. The assumption is that I'm going to leave behind my general Mardonius, and Mardonius will clean up this mess. This is a setback. This is irritating, but Xerxes is going home. Maybe he came just to claim the victory and spike the football and be seen with it, and when that was no longer in play, he just wanted to leave. Also, Persia was really big. There was a lot of other stuff to worry about. Greece is a footnote. To those of us in the West, it's the biggest thing about Persia. And because Herodotus is a Greek and we get the story from the Greek perspective, it would seem like the most important thing about Persia is Athens and Sparta, but it's not. It's possible that Xerxes looked at this as kind of a footnote and like, We still mostly won. I mean, we didn't bother to use the resources needed to go and conquer mainland Greece, the Attican Peninsula, the Peloponnesian Peninsula, but we got Lydia and Asia Minor. We got that under control. Yeah, that's a Persian W. Let's get on to some other things I need to be worrying about as the King of Kings. But the Greeks go on to win one more battle against Mardonius and the remaining Persian forces. It kind of just finalizes the line between Persia and Greek territory after that. That's the Battle of Plataea. And then, Themistocles gets ostracized. He gets kicked out of Athens because he's too powerful. He won too much.
Because he's right all the time.
Yeah, because he was always right. So they booted him.
Dang.
So, the process of ostracism was not permanent. I don't know, dude. This is risky. Let's not use names. But if you think back over the last 20 years of history, there at any given time is usually one lady or one dude where you're like, look, I don't want anybody to get hurt, but if we could, without violence, just make this person go away from all politics and all public speaking for, say, 10 years, it would be really good for everybody, right?
Dude, I sat on a porch with a man that this happened to. I can't talk about any of it, but I knew a guy that was a politician, and I had a conversation with him, and he was very powerful at one point in time, and then he wasn't. And I just talked to him about that. I'm like, what happened? And he's like, oh, well, what you don't realize is that at any point in time, at any point in time, they can get you. And it's just, when you fall out of favor, it can happen. And I remember the look in his eyes, thinking, oh, wow, this is interesting. Do you think there was some arrogance involved? Do you think that Themistocles was right about everything, and then he started believing the good things people were saying about him? Do you think that happened?
Let me bounce that back to you. What do you think? How did you read the story? Do you think that happened?
I don't know. I mean, I don't remember what it said about this part, but I do remember after the Persians destroyed Athens, and they destroyed the Acropolis, and after, I didn't realize Themistocles commanded the navy. That's incredible. But I did know that after the fact, they rebuilt the Acropolis, and they built one of the most perfect architectural buildings ever built, which is the Parthenon. And there's actually a Parthenon replica in Nashville, Tennessee. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So
it is amazing.
It's interesting to know that this was built on the Acropolis after the Persians destroyed Athens. And so it's my understanding Themistocles was involved in that as well.
Yeah. He got accused of corruption, not only by his own people, but he got accused of corruption by the Spartans a little bit later on when they saw that he was politically weak for a bit. Because the bottom line is, you get rid of Persia, but you've still got all of the problems that were sitting there before amongst these rival Greek city-states. I get the impression that Themistocles and Aristides were both incredibly arrogant people. I get the impression that the title The Just was one that he gave himself, but that people were very skeptical of. It was almost held to be tongue-in-cheek as his career matured.
Oh, really?
People went from being like, Aristides the Just, we can trust him with the spoils of war, to, yeah, Aristides the Just, am I right? These are not likable people for the most part. These are slick people. These are movers and shakers who only interact with the people they have to interact with for the purposes they have to interact with them. You can picture what the local political ruling business class is like in any given city. There's some cool people in there, but a lot of times the people who are really winning are the slickest and the smoothest. And Themistocles is a career politician, dude. He was a really good one who had the rare gift of being able to look 10, 15 years ahead and say, this is what's going to happen, and I will risk everything politically to make sure it does happen. But you don't get the taste of blood out of the mouth of the bear once it's done eating its first hiker. It just wants another hiker. It doesn't forget. And a politician who weasels that hard, even if for good reasons, history says they don't just forget that skill set and suddenly become docile and undangerous. They, even if it's not official, have all of the political machine of the most powerful Greek city-state at their command. and not even in public ways. That's why ostracism existed.
We as people, we get arrogant. When we start winning, we get arrogant and we start believing it's about us, and we believe that we're the reason why we're succeeding, and not just circumstance or God giving it to us. It's this law that happens, and it's the law of when you get successful. If you don't go away soon enough, you'll eventually become the baddie. You'll be the enemy. You'll end up saying, "Oh, let's just go destroy this other empire and plow them over." That's so weird.
Throw it into the volcano, Themistocles. Destroy it.
Yeah.
No.
I will not. I went to the Wikipedia page on Themistocles and I scrolled down. This is a bridge too far for what we're talking about here, but I'm going to go find a book about
I'll allow it. What do you got?
There's a picture of Themistocles standing before Artaxerxes, which tells me there was a relationship between him. It says, later life in the Achaemenid, I can't say that word, Achaemenid, say it please?
Achaemenid.
Empire, death, and descendants. And apparently he lived in exile, and he took a year to learn the Persian language for some reason. So, I mean, he got thrown out. Wow. Man, that's fascinating.
So the simple version of this story is a big, mean invader came and invaded, and brave Greeks defeated them. Yes, that did happen. A big, mean invader did invade, and yes, brave Greeks defeated them. But also, Persia was the most progressive empire in history. I mean, this was a nice empire, though. If you worked with them, they'd make you rich. They'd bring you prosperity. It was a really good deal compared to any other deal that had ever been offered. But then on the other hand, but what if you're in a place that's so far away that Persia can't really reach you and they can't really control you? And so they can bark a whole bunch, but can they really actually enforce that or even back it up this far away? No, I don't think they can, and we'd rather just govern ourselves. Thank you very much. It's complex, and people were on both sides for periods of time. There were weasels in Sparta, and Sparta was a bad place to live, and there were weasels in Athens, and also there was kind of the beginnings of democracy there, and that's kind of exciting. It's just a really multifaceted era that isn't simple, and I super enjoy the not simplicity of it. I like that it's weird and complex.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed learning this stuff. It was eye-opening to me, and I don't know. I feel more cultured. I'm not going to say I know history or anything, but like,
awesome.
I feel more cultured having gone down this path, and it was fun. Thank you for suggesting it.
Can I hit you with 2 closing questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Why do you think this matters? This chapter, this story, what's the significance?
Why does it matter? Well, I don't know. My family and I, when I was younger, I went over to my friend's house. His name is David. And his dad, Jamie, said, "All right, kids, story time." And I was like, I was spending the night with him. So I was like, "Oh, okay. What are we doing here?" And so he gathers up the kids and he sits everybody down and he said, "Tonight we're reading from Daniel." And he read from Daniel about the writing on the wall. I just thought it was amazing. Like, wow, we're learning. Man, y'all do this every night? This is amazing. And so I decided that I wanted to do that with my family occasionally. I don't do this all the time, but last night we just happened to be reading Daniel, and we read about the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar. We read about his dream, and his dream about the statue, and the statue had the head of gold, the arms of silver, and all the way down to the feet of iron and clay. And Daniel's able to interpret the dream. And what's fascinating to me is that the statue represents the different dynasties that exist, or the empires that exist. And then at the end of Nebuchadnezzar's dream, there's this force that just blows away all the shattered remains of this empire, all these different empires. So each level of the statue represents a different empire. And at the end, poof, it's gone. It all shatters, crumbles, and is blown away like chaff in the wind. And it's replaced by this bigger, newer, amazing thing. And of course, it's the kingdom is what it is. meaning God. It's Jesus coming to earth and changing everything. And so that's what happened. And so I think it's interesting to me because as I read it and understand how powerful these forces were that come against each other, it's just a chapter in human history.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, it was the most powerful thing in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the most powerful person
Ever
in the world. Yeah, the King of Kings is the label that they gave to Cyrus, and later on passed down, through, all the way down to Xerxes, the King of Kings. Wow, that's amazing. Also, they're dead. They're gone, and it doesn't matter. And all that hubris and all that fighting that they did to be even more powerful ultimately doesn't matter because they're dead. And I think that right there is interesting. Themistocles is dead. Cyrus is dead. Darius is dead. Xerxes is dead. Leonidas is dead. They're all dead. And we're going to die too. To me, personally, the reason it matters is because it just keeps me in check to say, hey, that selfish ambition and pride that comes up every once in a while in the back of my head, pride is something that I always really want to keep in check. And I'm really scared to start believing the nice things people say about me. And I hear a lot of people say nice things about you and a lot of my friends. And it's like, are we going to believe those things and try to get drunk on this power? Or are we ultimately going to realize that we're going to be blown away like dust in the wind? For me, I get to look back at this story between these two great powers that fought and realize they're dead. So I get a short period of time on this earth, and I need to think about how to use that. That's what it means to me. What does it mean to you? Why does it matter?
Well, that's a very thoughtful take. And I think a really important observation about studying history in general. In a way, what you just said sounds a lot like the book of Ecclesiastes. It's meaningless. It's hevel. That's the original language term for this stuff that you can grab at, but it goes through your fingers. You can't hold it. It's like vapor. You can see vapor, you can maybe experience it with others of your five senses, but you can't grab it, hold it, and own it. It's fleeting by nature of its very essence. It's fleeting. And the author of the book of Ecclesiastes, that old book of Jewish wisdom, is wrestling with that question. What do you do when you live in a reality where everything is so fleeting? And so, yeah, I think that's half of what you take from it. But also, I think both you and I would agree that what you do with this time, even if you can't hold on to your life, is also really important. And here we see a whole bunch of characters who did a whole bunch of different things, some of them more noble than others, some of them absolutely detestable. I think of Astyages and what he did to his right-hand man, Harpagus, over that offense and at that banquet. That's pretty stunning. I think of the dishonoring of the corpse of Leonidas at the hands of his enemy, Xerxes. And I suppose I could go on and on. There's so many examples of nobility and evil and cowardice in all of this. At the same time, for all of their flaws, these people really did leave a legacy. Persia is the granddaddy of the West. Also, so is Greece. And they're married together for all of time. They both have a role in how the whole story of human history played out. And they contributed by fighting with each other. So that's pretty interesting. And some other conversation would be fun to go through and think about how things might have been if this battle goes the other way or that battle goes the other way. But in the end, I don't view it as the West happened because Persia lost, or the West wouldn't have happened if Persia won. The dance steps of these two people groups produced what we think of as Western civilization for all of its good, bad, ugly, and weird. And I just keep getting more comfortable with the weird of history. Someday, not today, we kind of teased it, but we didn't have time to get to it. Someday I would like to talk about the question of how we know and how we relate to the past more. What do we do when we look at a story like this where we're not sure of every single thing that happened, but we have a really dramatic telling or two of it to play with? I think that would be an entertaining conversation as well. But I think these are two very enlightened, very interesting people groups with all kinds of flaws. And I consider myself and my mind to be descended from both of them. And so this is a very interesting chapter for me to look at. And the fact that you, my friend, for no reason and out of the blue with no prompting, would go pick up a book that you know I care about from an era that you know I care about and dive deep into it is just so honoring. I really appreciate you doing that.
I really appreciate it too, because interested people are interesting, and you are genuinely interested in history. On and off mics, I can just hear it oozing in your veins, and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna go wade in those waters, and I'm really glad I did, and I see why you're interested in it, man. Thanks for making me better, making me want to see this stuff.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
Let's science the heck out of something next time around.
Yeah, and I did hear that there's that second question there, and I do agree. It's too big for right now. The difference in the scientific method and the historical method, and I think we can do that question justice, and I'd like to do that.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be fun. Hey, we covered some good ground. This was a blast, dude. Thank you.
Yeah, it was awesome, man. Thank you so much.
You got a kids' ball game right now. Am I correct?
Yeah, I gotta go. But you are I want to end it here. Are you Team Greece or Team Persia in the end?
I'm team. I kind of think they're the same team, with the exception of a few years where things got a little bit rough.